Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Brews. In today's video, we're going to be continuing the quest to look at various 1/72nd scale Bf109s with the Tamiya 1/72nd scale Bf109 G-6. Now, this was a kit I'd known about, and I had someone, I believe in particular, asking about me doing one of these. However, in Australia, it retails for around about anything from 45 to 36 AUD, so usually well above the $30 price mark. And when a single seat Warbird in 72nd scale starts to cost more than $30, I do start to get a little bit skeptical, and yeah, but that's just my personal taste, but I'm sure many people are quite happy to pay that much. I have heard that this is a pretty good kit, and I have done a little bit of research on it, but I haven't actually had much of a close look at this one yet, so this will be the first time for me. But starting out with the box here, it looks quite nice. You've got this scheme here, which is from Zvezda 51 in Bulgaria, 1944. That's the one featured on the cover here. Taking off, it's a nicely painted one over some fields in Eastern Europe. It looks really quite nice. Here you've got your Tamiya color guide, so it's going to obviously use the Tamiya colors since it is a Tamiya product. And then on the top we've got the second scheme, which is from Zvezda 54. Again, it's 1944, so heading into the last 2 years of the war. So yeah, looking nice there. Repeat of the box art on the sides, and as usual for Tamiya, nothing on the back. So I'll open it up, and I'll start off by having a look at the instructions, as I usually do. So we've got a few sheets of paper here. We've got the actual instructions themselves here, which with the painting guide on the back there in black and white, which tell you how to assemble the kit. Got a few little warnings and advice for new people, so that's really helpful to have if you're starting out with this kit. And then we've got a little detailed history of the Bf109 in both English and Japanese, and talking a bit about the development of the G6. So that's really nice that they've included a lot of detail on the history there and explaining all of the service and how it kind of came about and the variants. Highlight of some of the details here, so we'll see the leading edge flaps, you've got all the armament options, dust filter air intakes which are fitted onto the tropical version, drop tanks, all sorts of details there. I won't go into too much of this sort of depth. If you really want, you can pause it and have a read of that sort of stuff. But it's nice that they've included it anyways. Here are the instructions. So they're the fold-out type, which is not my favourite, but at least you can still pretty clearly read these instructions. Assembly is pretty typical though, by the looks of things. Starts out with the interior, which by the looks of things is quite heavily detailed, so it'll be interesting to take a look at that in a sec. But you've got a separate part for the seat, which is just pretty much a basic bucket. You've got the yoke in the middle there, or the joystick. Then you've got a sort of cover that goes over the cannon. The trim wheel there. Then there's a bit of detail for the main instruments here. Let's see if I can... Yeah, so you got a painting guide there. I don't think there's any decal for the instruments, but they tend to be quite nicely molded, so you can usually paint up the details. Attaching that to the bulkhead there, which has the rudder pedals molded into it, which is alright. You can't really see too much at this scale down there. Attaching that to the main fuselage floor. Fair bit of detail on the side walls. Look like there's separate parts for the throttles and all of that, the oxygen system, and then the fuse box and the fuel line that runs through the middle there. Pretty detailed painting guide too there on the bottom using the Tamiya codes. Bit of a shame it's non-color, but still it's easy enough to understand as long as you read it carefully. Then you're attaching the side engine cowling covers there, and then the machine gun. Air intake for, I think it was a 2-stage supercharger, but I could be wrong. I'll have to correct myself there. Then there's another piece here, opening further up with the radiator at the bottom of the engine there. Exhausts, which have a small sort of cover on them on one side, so yeah, attaching them. Then you put the floor of the cockpit up through where the wings go. Attach that radiator, put the exhausts on. Then moving back to the rear of the aircraft, you've got the tail wheel there, elevator which slots into a hole there, and then the rudder goes on top. Interestingly enough, this is probably the only kit I've seen where the tail and the rudder are actually separate to the fuselage, so that probably means that you'll have a little bit more detail on the tail. So it looks like you cut out a little divot here for probably the cannons if you're going to upgrade the armament on the aircraft. Then you put the top half of the wings on, and then you attach the radiators that are on the bottom there, or the covers to them. It looks like the radiators themselves are actually molded into the wings. Then you put the fuselage and the wings together. You add this little bulkhead that goes at the back. Again, I haven't actually seen that before as a separate piece. Usually they've got that molded into the fuselage half, so that'll be interesting to take a look at. Then on the back here, we've got the landing gear. Looks like it's actually a really solid construction, rather than just being a small pin that you insert into a hole on the underside of the wing. There's actually a large chunk of the lower wing that's molded into it, so that'll be interesting again to have a look to see how the details are, but that'll make it a pretty sturdy set of landing gear. Painting up the wheels and then putting them on, and then the flap there to cover up the landing gear bay. Looks like there's also a middle piece that then goes over the top of them, so that'll make it really strong. Optional fuel tank here. I think you've got to drill out the holes to fit it, but that's alright. Optional drop tank going on there. There's a few of these little things which balance out the controls, make it a bit easier for the pilot to use, so it's nice they've got those included. On the other side here, we've got an absolutely massive attachment point for the gun sight, and two different options by the looks of it for gun sights, which is interesting, that you sort of have to feed in through there, so that should be quite easy to paint up and insert. Here is the cockpit, here's the canopy frames, so you got the front windshield which attaches onto the front and the rear one there. Separate one for the middle section here. If you want to close the canopy, you've got to remove some of the excess frame there to hold it open. And then it looks like you've got the version of the armoured glass headrest, so it's clear through there, so the pilot could have a little bit more visibility to the rear, but it's still reasonably protected. In typical style with Tamiya, you've got a poly cap, so that the propeller will still spin freely, which is pretty good. It means it'll stay nice and straight, and you can always paint the aircraft. If you like to airbrush it, I know a lot of people like to hold the aircraft from the nose. A few little antennas here, and yeah, then you can either put the canopy in the closed or the open position. So that's it for assembly. Then for the painting guide here, again, it's all in black and white, but it's relatively easy to follow, all using the Tamiya code here, as you can see. And yeah, the decals have a small circle and then a number, so you can identify them. Relatively easy to tell what colour's what. It's pretty standard camouflage schemes anyways. You've just got the usual RLM 76, 75 and 74 of the mid to late war aircraft, with a little bit of yellow on some of the marking spots and a bit of white on this one, I believe. XF2. Yeah, XF2 is white, I'm pretty sure. So that's interesting. Got white wingtips on the Bulgarian one. I thought the white was usually for the Mediterranean theatre, so maybe they were operating in that region rather than the Eastern Front, so that's interesting. I have to have a look at that aircraft a bit more closely at some point. Yeah, and here's the second one here from France. So, instructions aren't too bad. Not a huge fan of the fold-out format that they're in, but it's easy enough to read, and as long as you're careful, you should be able to assemble it quite easily by the looks of things. So there's actually not a lot of sprues in this kit, however, the one that is included is quite big, or at least one of them is. So these are just stapled together. So we've got the main sprue here, which has pretty much every single piece. The only sprue that comes separate is the one for the cowling for the engine cover and the machine guns. So I'll start off by having a look at the main sprue here. We'll go into this corner here. You've got the pitot tube, which is nicely detailed. There's a tiny bit of flash on it, but really nothing too much. Landing gear doors here, they look pretty good. A little bit of detail on the inside. There's a little bit of a sink mark on them, but that would get covered up by the struts for the landing gear, so you won't really see them. The landing gear struts themselves are just here, and there's some quite nice detail on them there. And it looks like there's a square pin for the landing gear tyres to go into, so that looks quite good. As you can see, there's quite a large section of the wing here, so it's going to be a really solid join when you glue it to the wing. Moving along here, you've got the tyres themselves. They're quite nicely detailed. There's a lot of recessed detail and a little bit of raised there for the middle hex screw there. Looks like there's a bit of a tyre tread pattern that looks quite accurate for the Bf109. Next to it, you've got the propeller hub here, which has a pretty nicely detailed hole there for the muzzle of the cannon that runs through the middle. And a little bit of a recessed panel line along the edge of it, which is quite nicely done. That's the actual base for the propeller, and here are the blades themselves. Quite solidly moulded, doesn't appear to be any flash on them either, so that's pretty good. And here's the tail wheel, and there's a little bit of a fabric cover, and the details moulded in on that one, which is really quite nice. Now, there's no real tread pattern on the tyre itself, but there is some detailing on the rim there, which looks really quite nice. Up here we've got the elevators and the tail. So not an awfully different amount of detail, it's just a different way of attaching the tail there. But there's some nice stuff there. There's some recessed rivet lines and some recessed panel lines as well. The control surfaces are fabric, they're just done with some lines. I have seen it done a bit better, but it's still alright, just with the way it's done there. Here we've got the cockpit floor itself. We've got some really nice details there on the various controls for the engine just down there. And a little bit of detailing on the floor, which looks quite nice. Rudder pedals there, a little bit more basic than some of the other kits I've seen, but it's still not too bad, and you don't really see an awful lot of it anyways, even with the canopy opened up. Joystick here, which is looking quite nicely done. They've got even the firing button on the top there molded, so that looks really nice. Even done a little fabric texture at the base there. That looks good. One of the antennas, I believe, for the radio there, which goes behind the cockpit, quite nicely done. And here's the little cover that goes over the middle of the cockpit floor there for the cannon, with a little bit of detailing on that, which looks nice. Here we've got the radiator flap covers, so there's a bit of raised detailing for the rivets, which is really nice and subtly done. And then some recessed panel lines for the flaps themselves and some of the detailing on them, which that looks really good. Nothing too much on the interior, I think those are just to line it up. And not too much flash to speak of on those parts either, really. Here we've got the upper surface of the wings, and there's a little bit of raised detailing for some of the rivets, and the bulge there for the fitting the landing gear in. And then there's recessed panel lines for the panels themselves, and also for the front slat here. The navigation light on the wingtip there is molded. The ailerons here, and then a little bit more detail here. Some quite nicely done caps. I believe that's to access the fuel tanks in the wings, which look really quite nice. And there's this, I think that's a bit of hair. It's a bit of hair. I thought that was some recessed lines, but no, that's just my hair. Same on the other side of the wings. Doesn't appear to be any imperfections or any flashing. And on the inside it looks pretty nice. There's a bit of raised detailing for the wheel well, and a little bit of detailing on the flaps there. The hinges for the ailerons are raised. It's just there, so that looks quite nice. Fair few injector pin marks, but they're all in hidden places, which is really nicely done. Here we've got the fuel tanks there, so there's the option of one drop tank, mix of recessed and raised details, all looks quite nice there. That's the attachment point for the fuel tanks, looking quite good as well. We've got the seat itself, which was, as I said, just a pretty basic kind of bucket thing. The only cushioning you'd get would be the parachute. And we have quite a nicely done instrument panel. We'll have to have a look. I believe there's some decals for it, or at least I hope there are as well. There's a nice mix of raised details for some of the switches and that sort of thing. And then there's sort of like a raised circle for the instrument dials, and you can even see like the little ammunition counters at the top of the instrument panel there are raised. So they've gone to quite a lot of detail on that, which looks quite nice. Shouldn't be too hard to paint up if there isn't a decal, but we'll have a look. Would be nice if they have one. Here's the side panel there. I believe that's got all of your circuit breakers, which are all done in raised details. And you can see the fuel line there, which would have been transparent, but at this scale, honestly, it's so tiny, it looks pretty good there. Looks like your throttle quadrant here. Move along here, we've got the trim wheel here, which is looking really nice. A few more details. I believe this is for the oxygen system. And yeah, they've done some really nice job doing those details there. Your counterbalances for the control surfaces. Got the exhausts here. There's a little bit of a seam running along the middle of the exhausts there, and they don't have any holes drilled out, but hey, that's pretty fancy stuff, but you can always do that later on with a pin vise or something. So yeah, exhausts look quite nice, except for that seam line through the middle, which is pretty subtle. They're really cleanly detailed. Moving on, we'll look at the inside of the fuselage here. So it looks like there's a fair bit of detailing on the cockpit wall itself there with the other half of the trim wheel. You can see some of the cables and pulleys and various dials. It's all looking really quite nicely detailed and quite accurate. The opposite wall here, you can see part of the fuel line, a few other switches, and a little bit of recessed and raised details for the inside of the cockpit there. Interestingly, there's some spines running through the inside of the walls at the rear of the fuselage. I think they've probably just done that to make it molded better, because you wouldn't really see that even if you had the aircraft's cockpit open, because there's a bulkhead that hides that. Although maybe you could do a diorama with it open, but I think that's more just for structural integrity rather than any kind of detailing. But looks pretty good. There's a few sinkholes that are in some slightly more visible places, but I think for the most part they're not really too visible. And besides, like I said, you won't see an awful lot of the cockpit anyways, even with the canopy open, to be able to pick those up. As for the other side, on the outside of the cockpit, on the outside of the fuselage, there's no detailing on the engine here because we have the cowling cut parts as a separate piece. But for the rear here, there's recessed detailing. It's pretty shallow, so you might, if you're happy with it being shallow, that's good. I might personally go over them again and recess them a bit, just because sometimes when you paint, it gets a little bit hidden. But for the most part, it looks okay. There's a few little access hatches there, which all look quite accurate. Little point there where the step is, so if you push in there, I believe it kind of opens up so you can step up to get into the cockpit. So all looking quite good. Then we've got the underside of the nose here with the radiator detailing. So they've molded in raised hinges there, because this would open up, so that looks really nicely done. They would have been detailed like that. And they're only on one side too, and then you've got the recessed handles there to open up the cover there, so that looks really quite nice. Bulkhead here for the rear of the cockpit, which looks really nice. They've done a bit of recessed and raised detailing, so that'll look really good painted up. Air intake here looks pretty cleanly molded. Not a huge amount of detail on this part because it's so small, but the main thing to look out for obviously is imperfections like flashing, and that would cover it up. But no, it looks really good. Looks like this is the cover that goes in between the landing gear on the underside of the wings with a little bit of a some sort of grate or there. Something. All recessed details, looks quite nice. They've even done rivets and that sort of thing, so that looks really good. Underside of the wings here, there's a lot more of the recessed rivets detailing, which is interesting. I would think there should be a bit on the top, but no, there's a fair bit on the bottom, but nothing on the top in terms of riveting. But here's a few drainage ports and access hatches, that sort of thing. All quite nicely molded. There's a little bit of detailing on the inside of the landing gear bay here. And that's the section where the landing gear actually glues onto the wings. So like I keep saying, that's going to be a pretty solid joint. A little bit of recessed detailing on the radiators there, which are molded into the wings, which limits their detail, but honestly, you don't see an awful lot of it anyways at this scale. And when the radiators are closed, although if you're going to open them up, you might want to have some photo etch or something. On the middle here, a little bit of raised and recessed detail. All looks quite accurate and quite nicely done. So on the whole, the details on this sprue look pretty good. Given that it's a $40 kit though, I'd expect a little bit more closer to the mind-blowing kind of scale, but for the most part, it's really quite good. Definitely better than the Academy and Italeri kits. Not even worth comparing to the Airfix one, although I do think the Zvezda kit in terms of the detail for the interior and the outside still gives it quite a good run for its money. Anyways, we've got another dark grey sprue here, and this is the covers, or the engine cowlings there. They're quite nicely done. Again, it's a mix of recessed and raised details where appropriate, which looks really nice. And doesn't appear to be any imperfections. They've done a nice job doing the raised hinges for the cowlings there on the middle section here, as well as the side detail here. Machine guns molded in, which all looks quite nicely done, honestly. So, yeah, engine covers look pretty good. You couldn't... you might be able to make it that the engine cowlings open if you cut away this and put in a resin engine or something like that. So at least you've got the option there for modifying, which is not something you had with the other kits, although you can't really do anything out of the box. It's not like the Airfix E model of the 109 where you get the engine detail molded into the fuselage and the cowling you can put on later. As for the clear parts and the two polycaps here, we'll open them up. So the polycaps themselves are polycaps. They look like a cap and they're made out of poly. So they're looking quite nice. I won't bother doing too much detail on that. As for the clear parts here, they look pretty damn nice. You've got a 3-section canopy as the instructions showed. You've got to cut away these extra little bits if you want to close the canopy, but that's alright. As you can see with my finger through the clear parts there, there's not any distortion. Almost there's pretty much no distortion at all really with the clear frames for the canopy there. Even the curved parts still look really quite nice and transparent. Detail on the armoured headrest here looks pretty nice. There is a little ejector pin mark, but I don't think you're going to really notice too much of that after it's painted up. And you've got your two gun sights there, looking quite nicely done. Yeah, so pretty happy with these clear parts. They look really nice. So you've got what looks like some pretty nice decals. I've only really done one Tamiya kit in 72nd, and that was a de Havilland Mosquito for the Queensland Air Museum for one of their displays. And the decals were okay. They kind of seemed a bit thick, so definitely going to need some decal softener, I reckon, on these ones as well. But you've got a nice selection of the common stencils there, which all look really awesome. There is a decal included for the instrument panel, 2 of them in fact, so that's good. You can put them on and you'll get some really good detail out of that. A few of the walkway lines and various maintenance things, and don't touch that in German. Looks like they've done a nice job on the little power system there. I think that's like for connecting ground power. Yeah, detail looks really nice, and you can read pretty much all of the text, even the warnings about the bomb release mechanism. Seatbelts are included as decals, and I quite like them on the Tamiya kits. They're really nice to use. So common stencils look really quite nice there. You've actually got some swastikas included, which are pretty rare to get. I'm a bit surprised that they were included in this kit, but I suppose censorship in Japan might not be as strong as it is in the rest of the world. As for the other markings, details look really quite nicely done. There's not really any imperfections, and yeah, you can read a lot of the text quite clearly, so they're all looking really quite nice. So, on the whole, this looks like a really fantastic kit. All of the details look accurate and are quite nicely done. All the molds are really clean. Details are good. The stencils or the decals are really good as well. Instructions aren't too bad. I'm not a huge fan, as I've said, of the fold-out format, but you can still read them quite easily, and the painting guides are still relatively clear. The only thing that bothers me about this kit is the price point, because it's a great quality kit, don't get me wrong, but I'm just not sure if it's worthy of the $40 price tag, when you can pay $20 for an Airfix kit that's got the same level of detail and really excellent stencils like their Spitfire Mark 1 and their Bf109E variant for $20, compared to this at $40. It doesn't quite feel like it should be twice as much in Australia, but I'm sure in the rest of the world there are probably places where you can get this kit much cheaper, and if you can, then that's fantastic. I definitely recommend it. And I mean, what the hell, if you're happy spending that much money, it's a really good looking kit. I don't think you're going to be too disappointed. It just seemed like it was a bit much in my opinion. This definitely is probably the best out of the 4 that I've previously reviewed. The Zvezda kit had a few areas where it was a little bit more simple than this one, and it didn't have the 3-piece canopy. And even though it was a different variant of the 109, I still think they're pretty comparable kits. And I would say that the Tamiya kit in terms of detail definitely comes out on top. As for how easy it goes together, I'd say the Zvezda kit's probably going to be a bit easier, but usually that's something that's a bit better to tell after you've actually built the kit. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like. And if you have any questions or suggestions, leave them down in the comment section below. A big shout out, as always, to my wonderful patrons for helping me fund buying these model kits and making my animations. And also a little shout out to my local hobby shop, Tectonic Hobbies, where you can buy this kit and many others. And until the next video, model on!